Hey everybody, welcome to Wednesday. I am going to split up the feedback for this week based on the comments. I've been spent about 2 hours yesterday reading the comments and going, oh man, there's too much good stuff here. I gotta split it up. I guess I'll do the patron thing right off the bat. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Some new, people who are new to this channel have become patrons, and that's super cool. Thank you. Welcome. Glad you're going to be sticking around some for stuff that isn't about Last of Us 2. This video isn't as much about Last of Us 2, but it is based on your comments about Last of Us 2. We're going to talk about trauma and trauma triggers and healing from trauma. And this is something obviously near and dear to my heart. I think I touched on it earlier this week. My own experiences with PTSD and being one of the people who came down off of sort of symptomatic elements of PTSD. I can actually talk about elements like, for instance, online harassment. That was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. It wasn't trauma is layered for a lot of people. The thing that finally means you can't cope anymore is not necessarily the core of the trauma. And I think that's significant when looking at Ellie in The Last of Us 2 and why I personally have such issues with the characterization. Because at the end of near the end of The Last of Us, after the first creepy cult in The Last of Us 2 games, like, really? More than one creepy cult? Kind of circling the bowl when you have multiple creepy cults in a world. At the end of The Last of Us 2, original Last of Us. Brain fart time. I apologize for saying Neil Gaiman instead of Neil Druckmann at that one point of the video. I'm a Neil Gaiman fan. I'm a Tori Amos fan. So I think I just went to my happy place in that moment, and me and Neil were hanging out with the Dream King, for those of you who know the lyrics to Tear in Your Hand. That was a brain fart. Sorry. At the end of the original Last of Us game, they had this metaphor of Ellie hunting a deer and seeming to sympathize with the deer, to relate to the deer. And it was this, indication that she was traumatized by being hunted, and it informed her, self-sacrificial urge at the end of the game, and added a very important element to why the choice Joel made was defensible. And I can see how a lot of people, with what they did in Last of Us 2, would react very strongly. I know I struggled with this at first, and then I kind of went, it's not that deep, this is just shitty storytelling. But the way the game strongly suggests that he should have let her die, and her life was not worth saving because look at how many people died because he saved her. That is an absolutely god-awful message to present to people dealing with their own trauma. And the reason I decided to talk about this today is because there were a lot of comments from people saying they've seen people break down, both on streams and like friends they know, people themselves who had very, very incredibly strong, like, triggered reactions to the game. It, to me, seems very clear that they did not have anybody who was really an expert on trauma consulting on this game. And when you're tackling these themes, you really should, especially in video games, where there are a lot of people who, I talked about trauma in the LGBTQ plus community yesterday. There's a lot of, yes, Momo, there's a lot of trauma in the gaming community as well. A lot of people with bullying in their past, a lot of people that, found solace in video games because they were picked on and gaming was safe. You could be a different person. You could have a different group of friends. I'm a little too old for the different group of friends part. Their Xbox Live did not exist when I was a kid, but it was certainly, I can certainly relate to the idea that you could immerse yourself in a game and get away from your shitty life for a while. And I do think that, there's something very insensitive on multiple levels at the really callous and not authentic way that The Last of Us 2 tells its story. I find the depiction of Ellie's trauma very cardboard. It doesn't resonate with me, and it should. Again, I'm avoiding spoilers for a while to give people a chance to play the game, but there are signs that Ellie is traumatized at the end of The Last of Us, as I said. And for some reason, that just magically goes away for the first 2/3 of The Last of Us 2. And you can't choose not to be traumatized just because it's inconvenient. Ellie's a bit cranky, but, they kind of do the whole moody teenager thing instead of traumatized teenager, which is, I found the moody teenager comments and like diary entries and things like that kind of belittling and minimizing. Do you call a traumatized child in a war zone a moody teenager because they're having nightmares? Like, no, that child is traumatized. And any young person growing up in that world would likely have greater to lesser degrees of trauma. And if they made, Dina's less than great behavior, if they had any indication that she was acting out because she too had some trauma going on, that would be one thing, but they don't go that deep. It all just seems like this series of vignettes without a really consistent character arc. And some people put in the comments, and I have no idea verifying this. It's a feedback segment. I'm going to talk about what the comments said, that multiple people in the comments said that game testers at Naughty Dog were saying you're going to have to dial the violence back, that this is too much, especially considering current events. I wouldn't be surprised if the violence is too much came up earlier. I do really think the brutal violence steps on the purported themes of the game, but more on that later. That's not the topic now. There's this bad habit that media has that trauma is something that comes up at convenient plot points, but doesn't really negatively affect a character's life, except perhaps their interpersonal relationships, kind of, sorta, but in a way that kind of generates pathos. If you can handle it most of the time, that is not PTSD. A diagnosis of PTSD means that trauma is impacting you to the point that you are not fully functional in your daily life. Everybody has bad memories and everybody has bad days. It's that sort of lack of self-sufficiency, that lack of self-stabilization, that is a big marker of the need for some sort of intervention. And the fact that Ellie just seems super fine, if pretty callous to other people's feelings for most, for large portions of the game, is just not consistent with any of the indicators of PTSD, hypervigilance, avoidance, reliving the trauma. Like, you don't see, I don't see a single pillar of PTSD, never mind all four. So, I mean, one could argue that her going out there and getting the crap beat out of her, that could be an indication. So I'll give it that. Okay, one tendency towards self-harm or unhealthy activities. But there's this sudden blank slate happening with Ellie in this game that bugs the crap out of me. And I suspect that a lot of people, the loss of that depth of character is a reason that a lot of people are really pissed off about this. Now, other people being triggered by the game, that's a somewhat trickier one. I think that sort of works on multiple levels, and not all of them are what is a classic trauma trigger. Because keep in mind, a trauma trigger can be anything. You can't, it is impossible for a game to strip out any potential individualized trauma trigger, because it can be something as simple as yellow walls, flowers on wallpaper, a particular song. It's very idiosyncratic, and there are major ones, obviously, that we can be more aware of, but we can't sanitize media. I do think that perhaps some reviews should have been a little bit more responsible in really warning people about the specific character of the violence, but the embargo instructions might have prevented them from doing that. But there are elements of the game, the way the game plays with your emotions, deliberately making you feel bad, stripping away choice at critical moments. I think it sort of breaks design to an extent. There's a lot of mimicry in The Last of Us 2 as opposed to a cohesive design strategy, right? So they're copying Metal Gear Solid 2 in places. They're copying Spec Ops: The Line in others. And the thing that made Spec Ops: The Line, like the white phosphorus scene especially, really resonate is because, okay, you're just following orders. It's a reticule on a camera, and you drop the phosphorus, and then it's later that you actually walk through and see the damage that caused. And I thought that was powerful precisely because that's probably, I've heard people talk about how removed drone piloting is from things like that. And some people do get pretty messed up from that stuff. They didn't have a full awareness of the consequences of what they were doing when they hit that button. Spec Ops: The Line, I found, I was not as impressed by Spec Ops: The Line as other people, but there was an example of a game that actually did sort of challenge paradigms. It broke new ground in many ways, and so it can be forgiven for being somewhat awkward about it, because it did do stuff in terms of interactive storytelling in that regard, that was daring and was, if not totally new, then a new application. Whereas The Last of Us 2 does things that are just dissonant instead of clever uses of interactive storytelling. Spoiler, there's this one part where instead of it just being a cutscene, the way so many other deaths are, the fact that some characters are killed in cutscenes, some characters require button prompts from the player, it's so inconsistent, I find it frustrating in The Last of Us 2. But here's the thing about trauma. Trauma is about a lack of control. It's not necessarily about the violence. It's not necessarily about the fear. It's the feeling that you do not have control to stop horrible things from happening, to stop people from hurting you. And the most effective part of the therapy I underwent was these little exercises to get back feelings of control. Because one of the things that people do that's a mistake with traumatized people is they try to do everything for them. They're trying to be nice. It's well-meaning, but all that does is make a traumatized person feel more of a burden and less like they're actually an actor in their lives. And so if you know a traumatized person, ask them if they would like help. Don't just do things for them. It can actually exacerbate the sense of feeling stuck and helpless. And the way the game, Ellie just killed the chick with the PSP, and I really felt like I should have been able to hit a button at that point. And here's another scene where you do have to hit buttons, and yet you don't get to choose a weapon. You don't get to choose any element of something. The game is muddled about whether these are Ellie's choices in those moments or these are the player's choices. If they're Ellie's choices, then don't make the player hit that button. If this is Ellie's story, then it's Ellie's choices. The player isn't going to feel bad about Ellie's choices in the same way about consequences for their choices. And then if you go the extra step and copy brainlessly Spec Ops The Line and make the player do something knowing there's going to be negative consequences, knowing they're going to feel bad about it, you are mixing up the helplessness, the lack of agency. I said very early on, I found the lack of being able to do anything in the early gameplay really, really manipulative, because then I got control of Abby and I could stomp on heads and do all this stuff, and it felt good. And then I realized it's not because I terribly like this character, it's just because I was so bored before that this was a refreshing change, right? The game does screw with your head in a way that is vaguely, caveat on this is going to be a dramatic word, vaguely psychopathic. It seems to lack empathy for what it's doing to the player. And, in the extremely forced portions of the game, I just shut down. Whenever a character goes, Omar, Mary, they killed Mary, I don't care because it's so forced. At other points, I actually feel like the game is bullying me psychologically. And if that's the convention-defying element of this game, that's just because you can doesn't mean you should territory. And even then, there are games that have done that. I keep bringing up Papers, Please, but that's a game that I actually felt ill playing. But I will defend Papers, Please just because it was to me, it sort of humanized the other in, these jarheads from former Soviet bloc countries are easy villains in a lot of Western media. And what Papers, Please did is kind of put you in the shoes of somebody who has to dehumanize other people for the security of this, Eastern Bloc, I know that's stated language, country. But then, the family's starving, and if you let somebody through, a whole bunch of people die. It was handled better. Like I said earlier, The Last of Us 2 does a lot of things that mimic what other games did without understanding why other games did the things they did. And when you create this Voltron of psychological manipulation, the Metal Gear games I'm better with Kojima now than I was when I was like full-blown PTSD. I could not play Metal Gear games. And that doesn't mean they're not good games. Quite the opposite. They are excellent games. They are excellent examples of how gameplay and story and character and theme all merge together, but that was the point. I mean, especially 3 was wonderful, but 4 I didn't play, and then 5 I had to dip my toe in, because everything from the sounds to the way characters moves, it was masterfully crafted to the point where there were times it was supposed to be unpleasant. I admit, the scene where Quiet is strangled in Metal Gear 5, it never gets not disturbing. It's not supposed... You're not supposed to become immune to that. It is ugly, ugly violence. And the player is a spectator in that point. That works. Because it does actually make you understand, not only feel for Quiet, but for me it really... Because I was one of the ones of, we named her Quiet. No, look, she's wearing next to nothing. And then... you learn the game and you learn about her and you see those moments of joy when she's like rolling around in the rain or something like that. And it smacked me upside the head a bit and went, you know what? I prejudged her. And that wasn't on the game. That was on me, right? Taught me something. I don't feel like The Last of Us is teaching me anything. I just feel like the game is torturing me and trying to break me. And I think it did break a lot of reviewers because... that Bay Area bubble where a lot of the big sites exist, there's a lot of that going on to begin with. Everybody needs to be friends with everybody because you don't know when you're going to need somebody, right? All relationships are just completely 100% transactional, including the sex. And I admit that it's more than a little disturbing, the number of people who don't see the really, I know this is cliche, but toxic behaviors exhibited. If you live in a society that has to rely on each other when you're going out on patrol, somebody like Dina who plays people off each other can get people killed. There's a reason they don't like fraternizing in places like police departments and the military, even though it happens. Those rules exist for a reason. You don't want people messing with other people's heads when they have a job to do that involves the lives of other people. You know what I'm saying? And that is a daily reality of that world. And it just seemed to me that there were massive parts of that game where, for one, why is Ellie getting into a relationship when she's driven by revenge that will likely get her killed? She's not stupid. She knows what's out there. She's been through this before. She knows how dangerous it is. why would she be getting into a relationship? Like, that doesn't make any, that's a very selfish choice. That's odd. It's not somebody she met along the way who kind of gets it. Granted, Ellie has a very understandable response to Dina at big OMG moments, but the whole thing just, am I in a San Francisco high school / university, or am I in a post-apocalyptic setting where, life is nasty, brutish, and short? Where am I? The game is all over the place. And I can really see how, joke if you want, but I can really see how this game can break the psyches of some people, especially under these pandemic conditions. Like, we're fortunate here in Canada that, Ontario is a very populous province. We have under 200 new cases a day in the whole province. And there's millions of people just in the Toronto area alone. I live quite a ways out, so it's even less of a risk for me. I have a sense of safety where I am. A lot of people playing these games to get away from their troubles and, found the first game affirming in a lot of ways. I can see like that the game strongly suggesting that Joel made the wrong choice takes away the beauty of the ending of the first game, which is one person caring about another person so much that they will go to great lengths to save their life, even when that person wants to die. That's an emotional thing. I think there are a lot of people that connected to that very strongly because they're traumatized, because they've got disordered thinking, because they have moments fairly frequently, sometimes every day, that they think the world would be better without them. The powerful message here was that even though Ellie thought that, Joel didn't. And the game basically invalidating the people who think Joel made the right choice, that messes with their paradigms, right? And then for Ellie to be just so shallow and awful, that makes it worse. And then for the whole journey to kind of seem pointless and sort of meander there and back, and there being no real emotional core to the hero's journey as presented. I know they want to pass that off as convention defying, but there's a very fine line between convention defying and just sloppy. And it sure feels more like sloppy than convention defying to me. One person said in the comments that something doesn't have to be wholly original to be convention defying. No, but there has to be something original in it. It's the change one thing rule. Change one thing, you're a genius. Change two things, you're a mad genius. Change three things, it's never going to work. What's the one thing this game changed? Even the idea that the game is designed not to be fun isn't new. Again, papers, please. What's new? What the heck is new? I'm really, really interested, because I think we have a right to call BS on a game that is just messing people up. And seriously, what's the point? Like, where is the benefit to all the people who are breaking down playing this thing? And not in a good way, not weeping tears of joy, right? A bad way. What's the innovation? Because isn't the whole point of all this stuff about sexism in games and violence in games, and isn't the whole idea that games should leave the world a better place as opposed to It's just weird to me that all these people who are games are too violent and games are too sexual, and they're giving the exact same people are giving this game a pass, and it checks every damn box in that regard. And I think that the sheer dizzying incoherence of the whole phenomenon, culture war and all, is part of what's wrecking people with trauma. And to people watching this who were really badly impacted by this game, the only thing I can suggest is take this as an opportunity to do some self-reflection, figure out, good for you for keeping going till the end. It shows you're resilient. If you are in therapy, even if you're not, figuring out exactly what hit your buttons in that regard can be instructive. I feel awful that people went through that, and I'm just trying to offer a way to have something good come out of something terrible, if that makes any sense. Because, man, I mean, I know I started improving when certain things really hit me the wrong way, like really badly. And it's like, why did that bother me as much as it did? And when I realized why it bothered me as much as it did, I could start to get to the root of the fundamental things I had to patch up, So hopefully you found this helpful and useful and healing, because, my God, as some commenter said, and I agree, the deeper this goes, the worse it gets. I'm actually starting to think that the whole design of this game was irresponsible. But you know what's not irresponsible? Supporting creators you like. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Wow, that was an awkward segue. Thanks for watching.